The planet Xenon was a marvel of technological achievement, inhabited by two intelligent species, the native Xenians, known for their iridescent skin and glowing eyes, and the humans, who had found refuge there after Earth's destruction. Over the years, humans and Xenians had collaborated on numerous projects, ranging from energy-efficient buildings to space exploration, creating a flourishing society that blended the best of both worlds. In the city of Luma, nestled within crystalline spires and futuristic domes, the most advanced research labs were tucked away in the heart of the city. It was here that Dr. Marcus, a respected human scientist, worked alongside the Xenians on one of their most ambitious projects yet, time travel. For years, the Xenians had perfected the basics of time travel, but they were eager to push the boundaries of their technology, aiming to make time travel more precise, stable, and capable of navigating interdimensional timelines. However, there had been one persistent problem, an equation they couldn't quite crack. Despite their superior intelligence and advanced technology, the Xenians were stumped. One morning, Dr. Marcus arrived at the lab with an unusual companion, his talking parrot, Charlie. Charlie was no ordinary bird. He had been with Dr. Marcus for years, ever since Marcus had left Earth, and the parrot had developed a sharp, sarcastic wit over time. Marcus had trained him to say a few funny phrases, but the bird had also spent countless hours listening to scientific discussions, absorbing bits and pieces of the complex ideas swirling around him. "All right, Charlie, you behaved today," Marcus muttered as he entered the lab, carrying the bird in a sleek, transparent travel cage. "No chewing through wires or causing chaos, okay?" Charlie squawked in response, "No promises." Marcus sighed, placing Charlie on a high perch in the corner of the lab. He had a meeting to attend across town, but he couldn't leave the bird alone after last week's fiasco. Charlie had gotten into his home lab equipment, managing to short-circuit half of his devices in a matter of minutes. Today, it was safer to bring him along. "Be good, Charlie," Marcus said again before leaving the lab. "I'll be back soon." Charlie blinked innocently, fluffing his feathers. "You got it, boss." The door hissed shut behind Marcus, leaving the parrot alone with a team of Xenian scientists. They barely acknowledged the bird's presence as they were engrossed in their work, their glowing eyes fixed on floating holographic projections of equations and complex calculations. They spoke quickly, their language sharp and clipped, discussing mathematical theories and quantum mechanics with ease. Zenon, the lead Xenian scientist, was the first to voice his frustration. "We're missing something. The temporal flux should have stabilized by now." Lura, another Xenian, nodded in agreement. "The displacement field keeps failing. Every time we run a simulation, the temporal coordinates shift. We're not getting consistent results." Charlie, perched in the corner, cocked his head to one side, watching the glowing holograms with mild interest. He was used to hearing these kinds of discussions. Marcus often rambled on about similar topics when he worked from home. Over the years, Charlie had picked up more than a few words, and while he didn't fully understand the intricacies, he had a knack for mimicry. "The entanglement matrix is unstable," said Thrax, his brow furrowed in concentration. "If we don't solve this, the entire project could be delayed for months." The frustration in the room was palpable. These were some of the brightest minds on Zenon, and yet they were all stuck on an equation they couldn't solve. The team had been working on the problem for weeks, and each attempt to stabilize the time travel technology had resulted in failure. It was at that moment that Charlie decided to speak. "You're all idiots," the parrot squawked, loud enough to startle the scientists. "Aliens with big heads but no brains, ha-ha." The lab went silent. Every Xenian turned to stare at the bird, their glowing eyes wide with disbelief. For several moments, no one moved. The idea of a bird, an Earth creature, speaking so clearly without their advanced pet-talking technology was beyond comprehension. Zenon blinked slowly, his iridescent skin shifting in color as he processed what had just happened. Did that bird just speak?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Thrax shook his head, still staring at Charlie. It must be a human trick, some kind of elaborate joke. But Charlie wasn't done. "Look at you sitting around talking about quantum stuff," the parrot squawked, puffing out his chest. "You guys need a calculator. Ha ha." Laura, her eyes wide, glanced at Xenon. How is it speaking, without the technology? The Xenians were scientists, logical and methodical in their approach to everything, so the idea of a parrot insulting them, and doing so with perfect clarity, was a blow to their egos. They exchanged confused glances, unable to make sense of what was happening. After a moment, Xenon cleared his throat. "Let's ignore the bird for now. We need to focus on solving this problem." The scientists turned their attention back to the floating equations, muttering among themselves about temporal fields and tachyon pulses. For a while, the lab returned to its usual atmosphere of intense concentration. But Charlie wasn't done. "You still haven't figured it out?" he squawked again. "Displacement field, more like displaced brains. Ha ha." This time, the Xenians froze. Xenon's glowing eyes flicked toward the bird, his expression one of growing concern. Did the parrot just mention the displacement field?" Thrax's brow furrowed in confusion. "That can't be possible. How would it know?" Laura looked equally baffled. "This is highly irregular." Ignoring the growing tension in the room, Charlie flapped his wings and continued. "Quantum entanglement. More like quantum entangle your heads. Ha ha." For a moment, the Xenians stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. Charlie was mocking them. There was no doubt about it. But more importantly, he was making sense. He had somehow picked up the scientific terminology they were using, and even though he was phrasing it as an insult, the fact that he knew the terms at all was astounding. Xenon shook his head, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is absurd. A parrot cannot comprehend the complexities of time travel. It must be repeating phrases it's heard." But just as the Xenians were about to dismiss the bird as a strange anomaly, Charlie did something that left them utterly speechless. "You're not accounting for the negative energy density in the quantum foam," Charlie said, his voice calm and measured. "Apply a tachyon field to the displacement vectors and reverse the polarity of the temporal anchor. That will stabilize the system." The room fell deathly silent. Laura blinked rapidly, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. Did the parrot just suggest a solution? Xenon turned slowly to face Charlie, his glowing eyes wide with shock. "It can't be." But Thrax, eager to test the theory, hurried over to the holographic display and began inputting the bird's suggestion. As the equations recalibrated, the entire room held its breath. Numbers flickered across the screen, the formulas adjusting and stabilizing in real time. And then, to the shock of every Xenian present, the result was perfect. "It works," Thrax whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "The parrot solved it." Xenon, usually composed and confident, found himself utterly at a loss for words. How could this be possible? How could an Earth parrot, a creature they had always considered inferior, solve a problem that had eluded them for weeks? Laura glanced at Xenon, her glowing eyes wide with awe. "This defies all logic. The parrot just outsmarted us." Before anyone could say anything else, the door to the lab slid open and Dr. Marcus strolled back in. He paused at the entrance, noticing the stunned expressions on the Xenian scientists. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, clearly confused. Xenon turned to him, his voice filled with disbelief. "Your parrot. It solved the time travel equation." Marcus blinked, glancing at Charlie, who was perched on his stand, looking smug. "Charlie," Marcus asked, his tone incredulous, "you solved the equation?" Charlie fluffed his feathers and squawked, "Took you long enough, haw haw." Marcus stared at his bird, trying to process what was happening. "Wait, you're telling me that Charlie solved your time travel problem?" Xenon nodded slowly, still in shock. "Yes, it suggested a solution to the equation, and it worked." Dr. Marcus was speechless. He had always known Charlie was clever. After all, the bird had spent years listening to his scientific rants, but this was something else entirely. "I don't believe this," Marcus muttered, shaking his head. "Charlie, how long have you been understanding all of this?" Charlie flapped his wings, looking as smug as a bird could. "I've been listening for years. You're not that hard to follow, genius." The Xenians, still reeling from the revelation, exchanged uneasy glances. For a species that prided itself on intelligence and logic, the idea that a parrot had outsmarted them was both humbling and bewildering. "Well," Marcus said, his voice tinged with amusement, "I guess I underestimated you, Charlie." Zenon cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "This is unprecedented. We need to study this bird." Charlie squawked in response. "Study me? I'll charge by the hour. Haw haw." The lab erupted in laughter. Even the normally stoic Xenians couldn't help but chuckle. The tension that had gripped the room moments earlier had evaporated, replaced by a strange mix of awe and amusement. From that day forward, Charlie became a legend in the lab. The story of the talking parrot who outsmarted the aliens spread quickly, becoming a favorite tale among both humans and Xenians. Scientists from all over Zenon visited the lab just to catch a glimpse of the parrot who had solved one of the most complex equations in the universe. Charlie, of course, reveled in the attention. Every time Dr. Marcus brought him to the lab, the Xenians would greet the bird with a newfound respect. "Hey, big heads," Charlie would squawk as they entered the lab, much to everyone's amusement. The Xenians, for their part, had learned a valuable lesson that day. Intelligence could come from the most unexpected places, and while they had always prided themselves on their superior intellect, they now knew that sometimes even a parrot could teach them a thing or two. As for Dr. Marcus, he couldn't help but laugh every time he looked at Charlie. The bird had outsmarted some of the brightest minds in the galaxy, and in doing so, had become a legend in his own right. And from that day on, whenever Marcus needed help solving a complex equation, he would jokingly turn to his feathered friend and say, "What do you think, Charlie? Got any more genius ideas?" Charlie, ever the comedian, would fluff his feathers and reply, "Maybe. But this time you'll have to pay me. Haw haw."